The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. The tragedy that changed America forever. On a warm Saturday afternoon, March 25th, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in Manhattan became the site of an unimaginable tragedy. What began as a typical workday for nearly 500 garment workers, most of them young immigrant women, quickly turned into a nightmare that claimed 146 lives and shattered countless families. The fire would later be remembered not just for its horror, but for the seismic changes it brought to labor rights and workplace safety. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, owned by Max Blank and Isaac Harris, was a production powerhouse on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the Asch Building. The factory specialized in manufacturing shirtwaists, popular women's blouses at the time. Most of the workers were Jewish and Italian immigrants, many aged just 14 to 23, like sisters Katie and Rosaria Maltese. The two had come from Sicily to support their struggling family. Rosaria, at 14, was the youngest worker in the factory. Inside the factory, conditions were dire. Long wooden tables were crammed with sewing machines, surrounded by piles of flammable fabric scraps. Workers endured 12-hour shifts under strict supervision. Smoking was forbidden, yet carelessly discarded cigarettes were common. The fire exits were locked to prevent theft, and the single, rickety fire escape was dangerously unstable. At around 4:40 p.m., the fire broke out on the 8th floor, reportedly sparked by a cigarette thrown into a scrap bin. Flames leapt hungrily through the room, igniting piles of cotton and linen. Workers screamed as the fire raced across the factory floor. Within seconds, the room filled with thick, choking smoke. Evelyn Goldberg, a 17-year-old seamstress, remembered the chaos. The fire was everywhere. People were running, crying, and screaming. I looked for the door, but it was locked. I thought I was going to die. Those on the 9th floor had no warning. As the inferno spread, women clawed at the locked doors, pounding and screaming for help. Some tried to use the elevator, operated heroically by Joseph Zito, who made multiple trips despite the growing heat. Tragically, the elevator cables melted, leaving many stranded. The fire escape offered little salvation. Crowded with desperate workers, the structure gave way, plunging dozens to their deaths. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but their ladders only reached the 6th floor. The helpless crowd below watched in horror as workers, trapped by flames, were forced to jump from windows. Witnesses later described seeing women holding hands as they leapt to their deaths, their dresses billowing in the wind. By the time the fire was extinguished, 146 people had perished. Families flocked to the morgue, desperately searching for their loved ones. Kate Leon's mother identified her daughter by a bracelet she had gifted her. The youngest victims included Rosaria Maltese, whose mother collapsed at the sight of her remains, and Teresa Russo, 15, who had worked to support her 5 siblings. Public outrage was immediate. The streets of New York swelled with protests, demanding justice for the victims. Blank and Harris were charged with manslaughter, but the trial ended in acquittal. Jurors claimed there was insufficient evidence to prove they had knowingly locked the doors, adding insult to injury. The owners received $60,000 in insurance payouts, a sum far exceeding the meager compensation offered to the victims' families. However, the tragedy sparked action. Frances Perkins, a social worker who witnessed the fire's aftermath, called it the defining moment of her life. She later became the first female U.S. Secretary of Labor, championing laws that transformed workplace safety. The fire led to the creation of the Factory Investigating Commission, which passed over 30 new regulations, including fire safety standards, mandatory sprinklers, and unlocked exits. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire remains one of the darkest chapters in American history, but its victims did not die in vain. Their deaths became the rallying cry for a labor movement that ensured no worker would ever endure such conditions again. Today, the Brown Building, formerly the Asch Building, stands as a National Historic Landmark, bearing plaques commemorating the 146 lives lost.